International Organization. It is the original content of what the Left-Handers International Organization. And today we're still going to be talking about abuse. Okay, just like we have been doing in the past, we're still going to be talking about abuse. So, 2 Sundays ago, we started to talk about abuse. And then I wanted to educate and inform everybody and help you know that, see, abuse is not what we think it is. Abuse is not just intimate partner violence. Abuse is family violence. Abuse is domestic violence. Abuse is not just physical abuse. Abuse is emotional abuse, okay? And so I emphasized all of this last week, and today we're going to be moving on to talk about something else real quick. We're going to be moving on to talk about something else real quick. And for the purpose of today's session, we're looking at, last week I started talking about the different types of abuse. I started talking about the different types of abuse. Okay. I talked about family abuse. When I talked about family abuse, I said family abuse is the type of abuse or violence or control that comes from people within your family. It comes from people within your family. It comes from family members, okay? From your brother, your mother, your uncle, your aunt. It comes from family members, right? And I also said that aside from family abuse, there are other types of abuse, such as social network abuse. Social network abuse. Guys, I said there is social network abuse. Now, I'm going to talk more about social network abuse. Social network abuse comes from people within your network. It comes from family, not from family members, but from people who are like friends, okay? People who are like your friends, people who are within your social network. Your social network can be church, your social network can be your mosque, your social network can be it can be people at your school, if you're in college, or you're in grad school, or your secondary school, right, or high school. Your social network can also be just your friends. And interestingly, one thing I need to help you understand, which is what I'm going to be emphasizing today, is the fact that abuse does not just come from family members. Abuse may have come from family members in the past, but when we talk about the continuity of abuse, a lot of times it might be something that you may continue to experience from people within your social network. So, for example, maybe you were abused in your family growing up. Maybe you were abused by an abusive father, or you were abused by, just someone from your family growing up, right? But somehow, you grew up and now you are no longer living with such, abusive family members. So much more that you have grown, or you have escaped from the abuse from the past, right? But it might happen that even though you have escaped from the abuse from the past, you might not be able to escape from the abuse from people within your social network, especially if they are your classmates, especially if they are your roommates, especially if they are your church members, especially if they are members in your mosque, especially if you happen to live within the same vicinity as they do, or they are co-workers, or the person is even your professor or your advisor, or the person is even a research assistant or member of your lab. You may not be able to escape them because you work with them, you fellowship with them in the same church, you do, you go for, you go to the mosque with them, you go to Jumat with them. You might not be able to escape them. And it is very important that you identify the red flags. It is very important that you know that abuse is happening everywhere. And because of the fact that these people are within your social network, they might not physically abuse you. The kind of abuse you may suffer from, from such people might be what we call physical abuse. Might be what we call emotional abuse, I beg your pardon. So because they can't hurt you physically, they might hurt you emotionally, they might hurt you psychologically, they might make you doubt your reality, they might gaslight you and say things that diminish your essence or who you are. And so, how do you then know that within your social network, someone is abusive or there are abusers? How do you know? Look at how do they talk to you? How do they make you feel around them? How do they, it is very important that we understand that social network abuse largely is emotional abuse. And because of the fact that they do not harm you physically, you might not recognize it on time. And so, how do you then recognize it? Here are the things that you need to look out for. Number one, if you're living with a roommate or a friend or you work with a co-worker or you fellowship with a church member or a Jumat, someone you meet during Jumat that you're afraid of speaking to or saying or opening up to when they do something wrong to you, then you need to be careful. If you're afraid of them saying, if you're afraid of what they would think or them saying that, maybe they come up and say something like, you're too sensitive, you should have, they just don't let you speak. They don't just let you express yourself. Then you need to watch it. If you're around co-workers or you live around people who would not let you express yourself, then there is a problem. Or you are actually afraid of speaking or telling them how you feel about something. Maybe you have a roommate who, when you're not around, this roommate would use your bed, will mess your space, and then you are always afraid of ever telling her to not touch your things. Because every time you say, don't touch my things, don't do it this way, they begin to say things like, what's even your problem? Are you the only one? Is it, can't we just use your space? They doubt your reality. Be careful of such roommates. Maybe you have friends who will not ask for your permission before using your credit card or before using your car. And then when you say, you should have told me you wanted to use my car, you should have said this before you use this. And then they're like, what's the big deal? Is it not just to use your stuff? Now take notes. There's a difference between you being overly react. There's a difference between when you yourself are the one overreacting, and then when it is so clear that they are crossing boundaries and they are not respecting your boundaries, your personal space, and they are making you feel like you are too sensitive or you're too, you're a pepper body. You need to be careful of such people. Though I've talked about roommates, now let's talk about maybe colleagues at work. There are colleagues at work who would come close to you just so that they can get information about you, about your personal life, and then they go talk to you, they go talk to other people behind your back. That is abusive behavior. Because you're trying to diminish the person's, you're trying to make the person feel less, or you're trying to make people think badly about that person. Backbiting is an abusive behavior because you're trying to reduce the essence of another person. You're trying to control, you're trying to manipulate any behavior. Like, we recall in the first episode, we said any behavior geared towards manipulation, control, it is abusive. So if you have co-workers who would go and talk behind your back to, I remember I was working in a seminary at a point in my life, and I was working with a toxic boss. I mean, when they say this employer is toxic, this person is toxic. Yes, they say, this person maybe had a traumatic childhood. Oh, let's just tolerate him. You should not tolerate abuse. You should not tolerate any behavior that has the potential to make you become abusive as well. You should not tolerate any behavior that has the potential to make you feel less of yourself. Do not tolerate such behavior. No one deserves to be treated in that manner. I have about 15 more minutes before we wrap up. Do not tolerate any behavior that reduces the essence of who you are. Now let's move on. And so that's what happened about, the toxic boss I had. There were people who would come and listen to what other people had to say, and then they'll go and gossip to this boss. And then when you go to meet this boss, maybe there's something you are entitled to as a staff. You go into your employer's office and then you say, Oga, I want this. And then your boss is saying something like, are you the only member of staff in this office? Nobody is asking for that. Why should you be asking for it? The question is it not spelled out in the terms and conditions of the job? Should you not be entitled to that? If legally speaking, within the scope of the job, or of what the job requires, or the benefits, you should ask for certain benefits. If you're not getting it, then and the boss is making you feel like you are the problem, then that boss is abusive, that boss is manipulative. Some bosses would say to you that you should come work at the office on weekends. I mean, let's say that if the job, does not require that you come on weekends, and then there's a situation, it's a different thing. And then I remember one time, I went to work. It was never spelled out in the terms of employment that, see, I should come to that office on weekend. And this boss will say everybody should come to the office on weekend. So I went, and it happened that he then said we should come on a Sunday. And I said, Oga, mi ò lè wá síbi iṣẹ́ Sunday, meaning I cannot come to work on a Sunday. Guess what? This person kept saying something like, you say you will not come to work on Sunday, just know that your job is over. If you will not come on Sunday, just know that you will not have this job. Like, we're going to get someone else. That's manipulative behavior. When you begin to use threats to control your staff, when you have roommates who use threats to assert control over you, when you have people who use fear to control you, then there's a problem. People within your social network who do this to you do not deserve you. You should walk away from such friendships. Yes, you might be living with a roommate that you can leave. Especially when maybe it's a rent and there is a binding agreement that will not make it possible for you to leave, that roommate or that job until a certain time. Begin to plan your exit strategically. Document, keep proofs of track. Like, before you begin to feel like maybe you are the one who is overthinking things, maybe it's your head that is messing up with you. Document, check the antecedents. Has this person been doing that to you constantly? You want to look at the person's pattern of behavior over time, so that you know where you stand as far as that abusive behavior. So you know whether it is actually abuse or something else. Okay, moving on. People within your social circle can be church members who are holier than thou. Holier than thou in the sense, people who, for instance, will say, you that you did not come for workers' meeting. I just hope that you are still constantly doing this work of God. I hope you are not backsliding. Excuse me? When people make such comments, you need to be careful. Or people will say, rí yín ní house fellowship, abẹ́ẹ̀fẹ́ wá church wa mọ́ ni. Like, it's so funny. Kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀ tá a rí yín? Heavenly race yìí, ẹ jẹ́ ká mú dáadáa o. Èèyàn gbọ́dọ̀ máa ṣe ìmẹ́lẹ́ nínú iṣẹ́ Olúwa o. Èèyàn tí ò bá ṣiṣẹ́ Ọlọ́run dáadáa, ó máa lọ sí hellfire. Like that, our Mommy G o. That popular Mommy G o. You need to be careful the things people say to you. Some people are abusive. they are manipulative, they are god, they have this, they are narcissistic in their language, in communication, and you might not know it. You need to be careful of such people. Another thing that people within your social space might use to control you, which is abusive, is deception. When you have people who constantly deceive you, or maybe they did this and then they say, I didn't do it though. Maybe they took something and everything is showing that they did it, and they are using deception. As the title of this book indicates, deception. This is a book for one of my courses. Okay, I just want you to, this is a book on deception. You may want to go find this book. And there's one scholar, there are three, scholars that I'm going to recommend. Dr. Griffin, Dr. Mark Knapp, Levin Knapp does a lot of work on deception. Then Dr. Griffin does some good work on deception. And of course, there are some other upcoming scholars like Shouty Fan, who are also working on deception. But the point, I digressed. What I'm basically saying is you need to educate yourself so that people will not just talk to you anyhow and begin to indirectly weaponize God. We're not talking about religious abuse yet. We're still talking about people within your social network. And some of them can weaponize religion or God in order to abuse you. When people say things like, look at you will end up in hell. Ha, that's how she is. They are trying to reduce you. They are trying to make you feel less of a human. Now, get it clear. There's a difference between if your way of life is questionable. And even if it is questionable, it is none of their business. They are not your therapist. They are not your counselor. They do not occupy a role that should cause them to judge you. And if such people are judgmental, then you need to work, you need to pay attention. You need to pay attention. I hope this session has been useful. If you have missed any part, one thing is go back and watch this from the very beginning. And if there's something you are not sure of, always drop a comment, because I always try to respond. So one thing that I want to say to you again is it is very important that, one, you understand that there is physical abuse, there is emotional abuse. Physical abuse is, yes, very much common, but emotional abuse is even worse, because people do not see the scars. All they see is this beautiful face, yet you're suffering and you're traumatized. Things are going on with you privately. You also need to understand that most people within your social network. Now, I also said that there are types of abuse. There is family abuse or domestic abuse, and there is social network abuse, religious abuse, and some other types. Today, I talked about social network abuse, and I went on to explain that social network abuse is that type of abuse that comes from friends, friends in church, in roommates or neighbors or co-workers, or even people you work with, employees or employers. Okay, so these type of abuse called social network abuse happens not within your family setting, but with people who are not in your family setting, right? But who, of course, can be abusive. So you need to really, know that it is not just limited to family members. And I also stress that it becomes difficult to recognize abuse within the social network, because usually it is emotional. It is not direct abuse. Usually it can be indirect abusive behavior, like gaslighting, indirect abusive behavior like weaponizing religion, indirect abusive behavior like threats, indirect abusive behavior like denial, deception, lies. All of these are ways through which people make you doubt your reality. And when you're not careful, they would continue to, they would mess with your mental health, and you would begin to build, you would think that is how life is. You think that is normal. You think that is how people should behave. That is wrong. People should not behave that way. And so you don't want people to put you in a position where you begin to think that abuse is normal, deception is good, lying is fine. Lying is a communicative behavior done that you it's a communicative behavior geared towards control. And abuse is a form of control. Someone who is trying to lie to you is doing that because they don't want you to think a certain way. They want you to think a certain way. They don't want you to know the reality. They want you to believe in the reality you sell to them. So lie, deception is an abusive behavior. And people within your social network use that even more than any other form of direct abuse. So indirect abusive behaviors are what you would experience through communicative behaviors that you would see within social network, within a social setting. And this would come from indirect behaviors that you may not be able to term as outright abuse. I mean, someone saying things that, like, for example, like I shared earlier, somebody saying things to you to make you feel like, it's not that bad. They might not be abusing you, but you begin to criticize yourself and feel that maybe the problem is with you. The problem is not with you. As long as you're not being insensitive, as long as you're not being overly sensitive. Again, you can be insensitive and overly sensitive, and as long as you're not being abusive, or you're not trying to be manipulative, as long as you're honest, you're honest, and you are not trying to also hurt someone else. As long as all you're doing is to protect your sanity and your space, you deserve to be treated right. You deserve to not allow someone abuse you, no matter how attached you are to that friend, no matter how attached you are to that job, no matter how attached you are to that church, no matter how attached you are to that mosque. Nobody, nobody deserves to treat you unfairly, unjustly. No one deserves to be abused. Nobody deserves to be stigmatized. And I hope that today you have learned that the responsibility to mitigate abuse and stigma is not just my responsibility. It's not just our responsibility at the Left Handers International Organization. It's a collective task. And this is something we can do together. This is something you can be a part of. This is something I can be a part of. So today, rise, rise, and rise. Rise to be that voice. Rise to be that, that advocate. Okay? Rise to be that person that would speak against abusive behavior. Stand on your feet today and say this pledge after me. Commit Bisola-Mariam, I commit to being that voice that will speak, write, and talk to somebody about abuse. I commit to advocating for left-handers and other stigmatized groups. I commit to standing for justice. I commit to speaking when there is violence and abuse. If I do not have the power or the authority to take action or social justice action, I commit to be that person who would find a safe haven, a safe spot, or who would support or help, okay, a victim, no matter how, even if I do not know such person, even if there is no relationship between me and the abused, I commit today to be that voice, to be that person, to be a part of the mission to mitigate discriminatory practices. I stand as a voice wherever in any part of Africa that I am, and I declare and I commit to continue to educate people within the African community that I find myself, so that we can mitigate this social menace. I want you to say this pledge and I want you to believe it. I, Bisola-Mariam, commit to being that voice, or to find a voice, or to create a space, or find a space that supports and helps victims of social stigma or abuse. I commit to not that I will not be an abuser. I commit and I say that I pledge that I will support campaign against left-handers and other victims of social stigma. I believe that we can have a just world. I believe that we can have a more humane world. And I believe that even if I do not have the resources, in my capacity, I will do the little I can. It's because the world deserves to be a better and a saner and a safer place for everyone, not for some people. And this is the pledge. Say it, mean it, share this video, share this information. Invite people to follow us on Instagram at the Left Handers Club NG. Invite people to join our Facebook group, the Left Handers International African Network Against Stigma and Abuse. Do what you can. Tell somebody about the Story Therapy Sunday series. I mean, someone somewhere is going through abuse. Listening to the message here, knowing what they do not know, because the difference between clarity and confusion is actually knowledge, awareness, mindfulness, because for a mind that knows is a mind that is free. Join us in making sure that this information gets to more people, that this knowledge reaches everybody in Africa and the rest of the world. My name is Bisola-Mariam, and today I have shared with you another episode, another series on the story therapy session. And I hope that you found this really useful. And make sure to leave your comments and tell us if there is a topic you want us to cover. That would guide us even to make this content more audience specific. Thank you so much. Abundance is here, there is no lack. And I'll see you some other time. Bye.